We are excited because coming on Saturday, April 15th, 2023, will be a virtual workshop taught by Paul Strickland. But you got to know the title. It's a kind of a big one. Collage techniques in storytelling, making a story more than the sum of its parts. Now, definitely a very unique one that I think needs to be shared more often in the storytelling world. And it is again on April 15th from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Mountain Time. But don't worry, there's a link down there so that you can get the time zone converter and the details. So that's storycrossroads.org/all-things-story. But enough about me talking. We need to hear from Paul. So Paul, tell us more about your background in storytelling and why this connection to collage storytelling.
Ah, when I first sort of encountered storytelling, I honestly, the first question was like, why can't anybody just do that? You know? And the real answer is anyone can do it. But then there's the question of how you sort of proceed to do it better. And sort of this approach that I kind of came up with by taking bits and pieces of sort of different art forms, specifically collage techniques, um, helps with sort of that diagnostic approach to not necessarily like how do I start working on a story, but how do I improve the story? How do I stop thinking of the story as one thing and think of it as all of these interconnecting pieces and parts that are all in conversation with one another, um, to build this vessel for my message or for my story to then have that be the right shape and size and be able to get that across the divide to the audience.
Well, and that can be tricky too, because storytellers sometimes can go off on tangents, and that can be a good thing, or it could actually go into a little bit into the weeds a bit. And this sounds like that it's acknowledging that it's already going to have a bunch of tangents, but done in a way that's more organized.
Right. I mean, I guess that is a possibility, right? There are sort of two ways I think of collage techniques in storytelling. One is this question of, we'll use the word tangents, which is to say that uh, we're talking about something that we don't know is connected to the rest of the story, and then those two things end up being interconnected later on, right? But another way to think of collage and storytelling is to think of it like that painting example that I used in the original video, where when you see a painting of like a still life or something, you just see a bowl with a bunch of fruit in it, and that's all you think about it, right? Because the artist has already done all the really difficult work of thinking about perspective and shadow and brushstroke and whatever. But if you're thinking about it in terms of collage, you can't help yourself but ask, why is there a piece of driftwood on that canvas bolted down with a rusty nail? You're going to ask yourself that question. And that diagnostic approach applies to images and characterizations within your story. So you might be working on a story that is entirely narrative and or linear, I should say, entirely linear. It starts at the beginning, goes to the middle, and ends at the end, right? I often say all of my stories have a beginning, middle, and end, just not necessarily in that order. But like, I find that even if you're telling a story that starts at the beginning, goes through the middle, and ends at the end, and it's perfectly linear, that this technique can help you find the places in the story that could be improved, that could be stronger, because you will be able to think about each of the component parts separately as opposed to as a part of this whole.
So I need to know, did you always perform with this collage technique, or did it come later on? Like tell me more of the story of why you're even using this kind of technique.
It actually came fairly organically for me. It was it is a way in which you can, for me, to take a story and be able to really focus an audience's mind on a specific thing that they need to remember. And that's really where it came from for me, was the idea of being able to separate a piece and really focus on that piece, and then be able to drop that piece back into the narrative later on so that it has the potential meaning that can come from repetition and from remembering and from calling back. So I think that because we have this habit of thinking of stories as single objects,
Mm.
um, that this was sort of my way in originally, to forcing myself to do a little more detailed work on my own stories.
Okay. And I still need to know a little bit more about you, Paul. So you've been avoiding that. So what has been your experience with storytelling for, like, you've been traveling around and some of the places you've been going to or performing arts? Tell us more about you as well.
Yeah. I mean, I have bounced around quite a bit as a performing and writing artist. So I went to school for opera originally, and my dad said you need to have something to fall back on, so I double majored in poetry. And then I went from there to I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where I was doing songwriting and writing songs in that area. And that uh, did not work out for multiple reasons. I found myself sort of weirdly on the road in stand-up comedy clubs, and this was years and years and years ago now. Um, and then realized that I had a lot of things that I wanted to say that I could not say in those environments.
Hmm.
And I wanted to find ways to talk about things that really meant something to me in a that had some emotional heft, that had some sort of power toward a kind of a positive approach to moving through life through some difficult things. And I found it very difficult in that environment, so I started working on kind of a solo storytelling show. And so I didn't have any kind of training in sort of narrative work, because all of my work came from music and poetry, which are extremely structural art forms. And so then I applied that kind of training with structure to my own work. And now, whatever it's been, 15 years later or something, I've been telling stories sort of using that technique and refining that technique and getting, I feel like, uh, much more clear
Mm.
about the way in which I tell stories. Some of my stories now are actually completely linear, which was not the case 10 years ago. But some of the stories that I tell now, I've found that it's actually best that they happen, beginning, middle, and end in that order, and that we don't take all of these sort of side tangents unless they're necessary to make a story more compelling for a listener, to make a story that sticks in the listener's mind so they can share that story later on with their loved ones.
Ah, see, that's what I needed to know, Paul. See, now I understand everything, I think. Well, not everything. Obviously, not enough. I need at least an hour and a half, right? So everyone, you're going to want to come to the workshop. You're going to want to come on Saturday, April 15th, 2023, from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Mountain Time. But again, that time zone converter and details and registration you can find at storycrossroads.org/all things story. And so looking forward to you teaching that, Paul.
I'm looking forward to being there. This is going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun until we tell again.